Okay, so welcome everybody to the Wisdom of the Pathwork Guide. And every 2 weeks, we just explore one of the Pathwork Lectures. They're all available on pathwork.org, and then we just read and discuss. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that we can take a look at the lecture that we'll be working with. Okay. I would like to be able to collapse this part of those too, and I can't quite figure out how to do that. But can everybody see the lecture here?
Yes.
Number 48, The Life Force in the Universe.
Yes.
Okay. So this was one of the earlier lectures. It was delivered March 13th, 1959. But I sometimes like to go back to these sort of early foundational lectures, and it's again this combination of very interesting metaphysics and to examine the life force. What is the life force? It's like, what do we mean when we say that, and how do we know it, and how do we feel it inside of us, and that kind of thing. So um, it's a shorter lecture, but it has a lot of really good points, and I ask AI for a little breakdown as well, and some interesting ways of exploring the lecture. So after we finish the lecture, if there's interest, we can do a little personal application. So let's begin, and again, feel free to jump in if you have a comment or a question, and I will try to pause occasionally as well to give people a moment, but feel free, to get my attention, jump in. So, the life force in the universe. This is lecture 48. Greetings in the name of the Lord. I bring you blessings, my dearest friends. Tonight I will discuss the life force in the universe. The universal life force is contained in every sphere or world. All inanimate objects, abstract ideas, and living human beings, and all living beings, basically. Nothing can exist without it. I will not discuss its manifestation in other realms, in high spheres outside your reach and understanding. There would be no point in that, since you could not grasp it. In my discussion, I will use terms that you can apply to everyday life. An inanimate object is petrified life force, a beautiful idea, a truth, a flowing life force. So it's interesting to me to try to kind of, as he sort of points, it's kind of like the finger pointing at the moon, to these different ways of conceiving or understanding or, tuning into this life force, and so, rocks and inanimate objects, he says it's not even without life force, it's just frozen, petrified, stuck life force, right? And then a beautiful idea, that's a form of the life force. Especially anything that's true is deeply united and in union with the life force. And then it's a flowing life force, and that nature of flowing is something that, is important for our well-being and, our, way of working with our own life force. So life force is eternal, and therefore all life is eternal. Death is but an illusion. An inanimate object you call dead is only so temporarily. All life, in whatever way it manifests, must exist eternally. For non-eternal life is no life, and therefore a meaningless contradiction. And I don't know, maybe that doesn't necessarily hold true with you, why could there not be, a non-eternal life? But if you sit with that, and if you kind of follow, this idea that, life and the life force are one, and the life force, I mean, it's kind of even almost like the principle of physics, energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed, right? And so it's eternal in a similar way. Maybe it's identical, I don't know, you're in two different realms, so it's hard to tell if you're comparing apples and oranges, but similar principles anyway, and oftentimes, that's a part of the way the universe operates, is repeating the principles of things. So the life force contains all divine attributes. That's pretty interesting. The life force contains all divine attributes. It is. It has not come into existence. It does not do. It does not work or have. It simply is. Try to understand the significance and the distinction of these words. Life force is all around you and within you. I think, at the subatomic level, it's like, it is. It's like everything is just pure energy, and it's just, at the quantum field level, it's this kind of, what the guide talks a lot about, a kind of soul substance thing, with all this. But it's kind of like this, just everywhere around us is the life force. And so I don't know, I find it, most fully accessible and helpful to receive in nature, and through the natural world. But, it's also in our breath, right? So sometimes when I feel like my life force is lagging or there's a task that I need to do that, I'm choosing, but it's, it's not easy. Then I like to sort of connect with my heart, which is also where a lot of life force is in us. We talk about having heart for something, having courage, having, and so, it's part of those divine, eternal, and divine aspects or qualities that are connected with the life force. And a lot of it is connected to, our willingness, our heart level, our, inner commitments and that sort of thing that allows us to, sometimes take on and be supported in activity. So my hope is that we can kind of learn how to do from the state of being and allow the life force of the being in the life force to do the work. That we kind of relax into that in a way. Mara, what's up?
I was thinking that the life force, it says, contains all divine attributes. And one of the things the Course in Miracles talks about is that the heaven in our mind is where our eternal being resides, never left, really. And that ego thoughts have to do with temporal matters and specific forms, and whereas qualities like love, peace, joy, gratitude, the one feeling of connection, communion, those are all divine. And the other thing I thought about too is like the inanimate object and a beautiful idea, one being petrified, another fluid. Ideas can be shared and are strengthened the more we believe in them. And it's more about, it seems like the life force is the content that may take different forms at different times, but that the consciousness behind the form is what is eternal.
Yeah, and I get that, and I don't know. I mean, the guide also talks about something similar in other lectures, and he talks about, sort of the soul substance, and that's a kind of impressionable life for substance that is imprinted, and it is imprinted by our intention or our consciousness. And so that, is kind of familiar. And it could be this is an early lecture, and he often uses different terms describing similar things. And then it's always a little bit of a, like, is that the same? Or, so, but I like to just, also like, yeah, okay, so let's say that it's, the difference between, it's mobility is an important aspect of it, right? And it seems like it might be, since it is just the being aspect, somehow imprintable as well, like rather than it's the active doing part of us. So more the feminine receptive, which to me kind of fits more with this, soul substance that is receiving the impression of the intention of the consciousness.
I also think Jesus said, I come to bring life more abundantly. And Path talks about, as we remove the constrictions and open more of our awareness, we can tolerate more energy in our.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when the Pathwork sort of, got married to, John Pyrakis and bioenergetics, and then he, like added the spiritual to the bioenergetics, and it became core energetics. And that was also about really a lot of that work was founded on the life force energy. It goes back to Wilhelm Reich, and, his whole work with the life force and the orgone and energy, and sort of that breath. The breath was also key. So a lot of the somatic therapies also come into this. And then I've been enjoying, and one of the things I've explored again is it's another lecture that seems to fit well with the interrelationship focusing work. There's a lot that is kind of corresponding there. So yeah, it's interesting to me how there's all of these truths in all of these different forms, but they're pretty well, saying the same thing. I like hearing them sometimes from different angles, because it can make me see something I hadn't quite grasped before. But good, thank you. Anything else? Okay, so a human being living in complete and utter harmony with the life force would not die, yet would not remain in the physical body either. For your matter is petrified life force, and exists only where the field of the life force is disturbed in some way. So it's always interesting to look at the body. I know in a lot of spiritist systems as well, it's kind of like, it's the avatar, it's the apparatus, it's the instrument. And then the consciousness, the soul, is what is it's how we, we animate in 3D through the body, but the soul is bigger than that and multidimensional. And so it's our physical, body that, but it also is connected with the life force all around in the earth, and our own, sort of images and sacred wounds. And that's part of what causes the contraction or the blocks. And so life force in general is petrified, or the body in general is petrified life force. And then some more of our life force can get frozen in our various defenses and in our various kind of, trauma reactions and things like that. So, and you can see, you look at people, and how flowing or how stiff, how alive or how dead. It's like you can recognize, the people in a way through the life force. And, it's also, I think, what we see that attracts us. We see somebody that does have a lot of real life force, and, it's like we gravitate to it, something that we like, and there's eros there. So wherever the life force has not been violated, happiness, that is complete harmony and peace, can be yours without the trepidations and fear of losing it again that accompany temporary happiness for you human beings. So, this is part of our difficulty is, we're always chasing after and losing happiness and, kind of on this rat race that never quite. And what we're longing for is just, to have complete harmony and peace without the fear of losing it again. And he says that, it's possible for us. You all know from the teachings that you have so far received that you violate spiritual law constantly within your soul, if not in deed, word, or thought, at least in your unconscious emotions. Whenever such violation happens, you twist the life force that could flow through you. Like the higher self qualities, the natural flow of it, somehow because of our contraction, our misconception, our, something that's, not the truth in God, like causes a twist in this life force. And you prevent the life force from reviving you. So, that's interesting to me because, I always wonder, how we can receive more life force, right? Because as I age, of course, it's, they talk about, we kind of have an egg yolk around us when we're born. And by the time we're in our 40s, we've used that up. And then we start, having to gain life force daily. And if we can't keep up with that, and of course, as our body also starts, wearing down or doing less efficient job, then, it requires more. But I do think that a lot of longevity and also, our health, there's something to do here with the body and the twists and the life force that then don't allow the flow in the way that could help us, revive us. So what I'm showing you on this path of self-finding is a gradual, slow way, there is no faster way, to dissolve all the walls, rocks, and petrifications within yourself, and so allow the life force to work in you. Whoever has experienced even a slight victory has overcome a resistance, found a truth, or made a recognition, even an unpleasant one, or rather exactly these, has experienced a feeling of peace, strength, and a sense of being vibrantly alive until the next obstruction is tackled. These rare moments should be living proof to you that what I say is not just a beautiful story or a remote and abstract theory without any bearing on the now. It is utter reality accessible to you any time if you choose to turn inward. The obstructions within your soul can exist only because you have violated divine law in some way. When divine law is violated, the life force cannot work. Note that the word law has a very often a wrong connotation for you. Most human beings, when they hear this word, react to it emotionally in a way that has nothing to do with the sense in which I mean it. Law means to you, often unconsciously, something you are forced or compelled to obey, an authority that is stronger than you. I outlined this in a whole lecture recently, which is the lecture on authority. This kind of emotional association with the concept of law is completely opposed to its true meaning. Law in its real and divine sense has nothing to do with force or compulsion. Quite the contrary. As soon as force or compulsion set in, whether from outside or from within your own self, at that moment, divine law is violated. For divine law is inner freedom. So I find this, kind of really interesting, and I don't think I'd quite taken it in fully, before recognized, but, this also goes along with, what the cosmology lectures were talking about, of this sort of sacrosanct free will. And, we're talking about this flow in this lecture, and for the life force to move, so, and then, like the violation of inner freedom is often, we think we have to mask something, or pretend, and so the truth gets lost. And, so that creates all of the distortions and destructiveness. And so, it's kind of like, rather than pretense, rather than force or compulsion, rather than all of the shoulds in our, inner realms that we think we have to uphold, he's basically saying that those are all, the voices that kind of tempt us into violating divine law, and we feel it inside. I mean, like there's usually a resistance that we have, and yet then we're sort of taught that that's just rebelliousness, which it is in some ways, right? But that there's a way in which what we want to do is break through the projection of the authority and come back in to find what is true for us in that moment. And even if it, may be the wrong choice in the, long term of things, right? We need to follow our truth in that moment to learn, to grow, to, experience what the real truth is and help, dispel our illusions. And that's what this earth life is for all of this experiencing and growth. And we want to try to control it so we don't make mistakes, so we always win, so we don't get hurt. But all of that is really what we came here for. So we have to, have a different relationship sometimes to, life's difficulties and the challenges and the, the unknown natures of things, so that we can appreciate that we learn through our choices and through our free will. So he says you can gain inner freedom only by liberating yourself from errors. As the first and inevitable step, you have to bring them into consciousness. Only after that can you free yourself from them. So instead of talking about violating divine law, it might be better to say that divine truth is violated. For truth is life force, and truth is certainly divine law. You all know, my dear friends, that the path on which I lead you shows you the truth about yourself. Did you want to say something, Davis? No? Okay. So yeah, so like, tune in, does it, how does it land in you when you hear divine law? Does that, hit your, child, with the outer authority issues? Does it feel different inside if you say, violating divine truth or upholding, or aligning with divine truth rather than law, right? Does that make it help you in a way to relate to it? So sometimes I like, like the guide does this, using of different language and different words for things, because I think it helps us, get around some of our blocks and stuff that way. So life force is regeneration. Petrified life force means degeneration. In your images, in your wrong conclusions, and that's what he means when he says an image is a wrong conclusion. But it's interesting because he says it's a substance, or it's a pattern in the soul substance. So the wrong conclusion, even though it's a thought, is a thought form, and that form lives in our field and controls the flow of the energy in our field. So when he says image, it's like, yeah, it's a wrong idea. It's a overgeneralized conclusion from the past. But it's more than that. It's actually an energetic imprint in our field that then also adds to our how we seem like we keep recycling it, keep repeating it, keep, proving it to ourselves. I know that all along, So, this is an important understanding, I think, to have, So he says, in your images, your wrong conclusions, your conscious and unconscious ignorance and errors, you do not live in truth, right? So even if it seems true, even from all our experience, it seems true. If it's an overgeneralization or an image, then most likely there's an element of projection in it. And even if it's only an element, right, it's no longer in that, divine truth place, right? There's often in our earth realm, we're in a combination of divinity and distortion, right? And a lot of our impulses or our understandings are, right on in a certain way, but, if we look at it, if we take it a little further, or we, see it from this angle, then it gets distorted. So, we're always sort of trying to realize that the truth is being refined, and we're questioning within to find that the highest truth that we can to navigate with. It's kind of like the breadcrumbs on the journey of the soul, and helps us know how to proceed. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it occurs to me that unless you get on a path like Pathwork and make a conscious effort to be the objective, conscious observer of your um, errors and ignorance, no one is ever going to tell you that what you believe is wrong or false.
And even if they did, you
Because
wouldn't hear
people
them.
don't like to tell other people that they're wrong, and what they believe is wrong.
And that's the problem, because like if you try to tell somebody that, they're just going to rebel, because you're
Exactly.
you're usurping their free will, their authority, their inner right to learn for themselves.
Exactly. And it's unfortunate that not more people are on the path.
Yeah, and I don't know. I hopefully maybe more and more. But the guide actually said, well, somewhere it's like, it's too much work to have like mass followings, right? It's here for, I think, for those of us that hear it and are called by it, to embody it as much as we can, and be the force. It's kind of like, it reminds me, like, we spend all this time reading and studying these lectures, and I don't know if, Gen Z will actually read the official words of the, guide, but through us, through our embodiment, through other programs, through translating it, who knows, what it needs, but hopefully it's a living thing that, continues forward, and does expand. And
Yeah.
my
I'd
understanding is,
also like to say that as much as I try to be the conscious objective observer of my wrong and ignorant thoughts, I don't always get there, you know? I mean, I can go for long periods of time completely blocked in a falsehood or an ignorance, and then, maybe wake up to it after it's too late sometimes.
I don't know that it's ever too late, but yeah, I get it. I mean, what happens is we either merge with, the state, the false, image, untruth, pain body, state, or we're fighting it, oh, I don't want to go there. I shouldn't, so we're trying to resist it. And you're right, the way to go, not this way or that way, but it is like the eye of the needle, is to find this observing self that can be bearing witness to all of these inner experiences in our bodies, in our unconscious, in our thoughts, in our feelings. And So this is where, again, I like the inner relationship focusing, because it really literally uses this phrase to invoke that state, when we're doing the work, right? And just to remember and practice it helps. So I notice something inside of me wants my attention, and that I becomes the higher self in presence, connection to that compassionate, curious, observer, that's open, wants to help. What's going on here? I notice, I feel all blocked and tense, I could have a million stories about it. But if I go into the present moment, into this life force experience, feel in my, body and my energy field, then I can learn so much more about it and help, resolve it, help it untangle itself, help it unthaw and unfreeze. So, but it does take our own inner presence to these other parts of us. They can't do it alone, and even though they try, we have to wake up. That's the part of the work that's here now. We have enough understanding of all of this, but we have to have the tool of that higher self presence now to identify with and work, with all of the parts of us. That integrates them. So
the guide's suggestion about using daily review, I've never been able to make myself do it. Because it's focusing on, go review your day, don't 10, 15 minutes. Where was there disharmony? Then you're caught in a me versus them or us versus them, rather than we're one. And it can help the objective observer, but I've never been able to do that. I always have to say, I'm not at peace, or I'm not feeling great. What's going on? I can do it in the moment, but not, I've never
the
been
daily
able
review.
to do daily review.
Yeah, I think actually the daily review, I mean, it's good for some people. I think there's different tools, and different things work for different people. But yeah, I think it's a more conceptual tool, that can then kind of, you can back up and sort of see patterns, right? But I think in order for us to really heal these things and to start thawing the life force, et cetera, we have to be in the body, in the feelings, and, correcting, like the inner wounded child, for instance, that feels like it has to be frozen, right? There's a higher truth than that it needs to hear from the voice of love, so that it can relax and melt and let go of all of, the tensions that are, blocking the life force. And when it can do that, and it gradually heals and, transforms that energy as well, which I think a lot of times it's ancestral, or it's, other, kinds of trauma. And so in a way, everybody doing their own inner work is also healing in the collective. It's transforming this energy, through us and through our lineage. We are working, for a higher state and more regeneration and less degeneration, less petrification. Okay, so let's see. So it's, saying that physical sickness is also like when we freeze the energy, right? Eventually it'll somatize. So let me go back to the beginning of the sentence. In your images, your wrong conclusions, your conscious and unconscious ignorance and errors, you do not live in truth. And I would say in some ways in freedom, right? And therefore you prohibit the life force, which through it has many other attributes and is always a healing force for your body, your mind, your soul, and for your spirit. So if we're split off in some way from the life force, that's the force that we need for the healing. So thus you will readily believe that all physical sickness is only a chain reaction, a final outer manifestation of obstructed life force. And I think he's including old age and dying, right? But, we have to humble ourselves, well, we don't know how to do it yet, but, I think it helps us understand how much, the body is sacrificing and working, to carry our ignorance and our darkness in some ways, right? And yet, it's like it's doing it again to allow us the freedom to learn and grow at our own rate, in our own way, in our own unique, journey. So the love of God is present in that, in a very profound way. So he says, whenever you have obstructions within your soul, the only way to cure the malady is first to prepare for the proper reception of the life force. The first step is to encounter the untruth, and that, of course, is not pleasant. And this leads many people to believe that our path cannot be the right one, because they have to go into the descent and towards the pain. They can't just avoid it or spiritually bypass or transcend. They think that because the divine is beautiful, harmonious, and blissful, to experience the very opposite is an indication that something contrary, wrong, to the divine is taking place. What a misunderstanding, my friends. How can you believe that you can simply bypass all the disharmony you yourself have planted in your soul and then directly experience divine harmony? You have to understand the wrong causes you have set in motion before you can truly understand divine truth. If you have planted a poisonous plant in your garden, spoiling all the good plants, can you get rid of the bad plant without getting hold of it and pulling it out? This work is not exactly pleasant, for the poison may even affect you temporarily while touching it. But this cannot be avoided. It is better than to leave the poisonous plant in your garden. Pain has to be endured one way or another before you can get rid of that in you which causes and has constantly caused pain. You must learn to distinguish between two basic kinds of pain, my friends: the degenerating and the regenerating. I think in other places he also talks about, hard pain and soft pain, and maybe they're similar. I hadn't thought about that until just now. But here he's talking about, and it makes sense, that there's a kind of growing pain. There's a pain of, lancing the boil for the healing to happen. There's a pain of, working, for healing that has to go into and through and out the other side of the block that's creating the pain. And so we can't run away from it. We can't avoid it. We have to learn how to be with pain. And I think this is another interesting confusion because, when we talk about trauma work, I don't think that means that we have to go back and always remember or recreate or psychodrama or do the whole, story of the trauma. What I think we're learning on the somatic level a little more is that trauma is literally, held in our body. And the story is kind of connected with it. But if we go to the mind and start recycling the story, that does just seem to keep us spinning in the suffering of that. And if we instead just look at, okay, so right in my body, I have this tangle, or I have this, tension, or this block, or this frozen life force that's keeping me from, having my fullness, and then it's like if we go in and, first what we're going to feel is whatever the block is, the tension of the block, and we can notice that. And then maybe we can even explore, well, what would I feel? Because most of those blocks are there to keep us from feeling something. And so you might, the first thing is bad feeling of the block. Maybe it's numbness, or maybe it's just tightness or heaviness or something, and the stuckness there. And then maybe the next layer, you're feeling, what's underneath that block, which was the pain that you were trying to avoid in the first place. And sort of to bridge the gap between the block of the frozen life force into, the life force of the original pain that needs to move again, we have to sort of be present, and almost like we can talk to our muscles, because it's actually our muscles that are holding the energy in large part. And when we can feel in our bodies, we can sometimes even feel, oh, I feel this block, and yeah, I feel like I'm tightening right here, and that's part of what's, causing it. And so we can just sort of, from our self in presence, our higher self observer, we can say, oh, I see you, I'm here, let me see, can you relax for me a minute just so I can see what would happen if you did, and what's underneath that you're protecting. And oftentimes, like the muscle will actually, go along with that, if it feels, safe. If it doesn't, you'll find out, and maybe there's other steps that you can take to help it. But in a sense, what we're trying to do is release the block, at least for a moment, and we can always go back to it, and that helps reassure these parts that are using this block, because it was part of their defense system and protection. But, when they can release a little bit, so that the self in presence, can witness what's underneath that, then that helps. And if we can really, feel safe enough to breathe through and ride that flow of that pain, that will take us into a healing space. That will be the grief that is released at the very core of the wound. And, when we release that pain, then we have room for joy. Then we, have this regenerative experience. The other degenerating kind of pain is just the contraction into the tighter contraction until, we basically go into rigor mortis before we die, right? So, mobility is so key, right? And we don't realize how much we avoid the movement to avoid the feeling. And so anyway, continuing on. Any comments, questions on that? So there is a kind of pain of becoming sick, feeling the symptoms of an onsetting illness. One is then on the downward curve. And then there is a different kind of pain, often even more acute, which goes with the healing process. The regenerating pain. This is often, indeed always necessary before complete cure or healing can take place. Such pain is on the upward curve. Before undergoing an operation, for instance, first you feel the kind of pain of becoming sick, often long before you know what is wrong. And then your physician finds out and he operates on you. In the healing process, you endure a completely different kind of pain. You all know that the wound cannot heal before the pus has been let out, and in a clean state the tissues can grow together again. This is the regenerating pain. The same holds true for the soul. You cannot escape this reality, my friends. You have the choice either of remaining on the downward curve in the state where you suffer from the symptoms, refusing to go to the root of the evil, or of the mustering up courage, approaching the problem, cutting open the wound, and thus allowing the healing forces of nature to take over. After letting out the pus, your errors, your wrong conclusions, you need to endure for a while the kind of pain that is regenerating. The operation itself would be the unpleasantness of facing what is wrong with you. It is the high point, or shall we say the low point, before the upward curve can begin. By visualizing this, it may be easier for you to work your way out of the trap you now find yourself in. You do not need to endure blackness and despair. Turn around, my dear ones, and try to understand what I say here, and approach the real affliction instead of continuously paying attention to the symptoms only. Even my friends farthest advanced on the path are tempted to look at the symptom of evil rather than the cause, because of their unconscious fear of the sharper pain of the operation. Understand that once you have the courage to go through the operation, the time of pain is very short. If, however, you stay on a downward curve, attaching yourself to the symptoms, the story, the victim place, right? Turning away from their origin within yourself, the suffering will last. The pain will endure as long as you do not decide to face the real problem and decide for the operation. And so this is a lot of times we see our brothers and sisters, like deep into this victim place, and a lot of them, are very longing to find a way out, and this is often, addiction issues a lot, kind of this sort of thing, where it's like they just struggle with facing the feeling of the pain. They want to avoid the pain at all costs, so they turn to their addictions, whatever they are. And yet they suffer in their addictions, and they feel miserable, and they know that that's not who they are or what they want to be. And so there's another kind of suffering that then just drives them even deeper if they can't turn around and face and go towards these feelings. And it's often very difficult. And we often those people are very sensitive and carry lots and lots of grief from childhood for various reasons, so it's a lot. We need to really have a lot of compassion in our higher self for all that each soul carries, ourselves and other people. There's some really interesting assignments people have taken on, oh my goodness, I'm glad, I'm not doing your job. So the advice does not only apply to taking this path as a whole, but should be applied to every step on it. You may be on the path all right and still deliberately overlook certain sick points in your soul. It's hard sometimes to see, it really is. That's why our life where it's not working is such a good mirror for us. This is attachment to the symptoms. This again is attachment to the symptoms. The more you dissolve the inner obstructions, the petrifications, by facing your misconceptions, misunderstandings, and the untruth that lives in your soul, the more you allow the life force to flow through you. The more you do that, the sooner you will revive on all levels of your being. And so this is one of the things I like also about this inner relationship focusing is because in the beginning, it's like you're just acknowledging it's there, right? And just that simple acknowledgement allows things to flow a little bit more, right? It's like when we're holding some, like this fear that it shouldn't be or something's wrong or we shouldn't, and we're, resisting it in some way and also identified and in conflict, we really can't, it's all tangled up and we can't relax into it and it can't begin to change. So just doing this simple piece is huge. And then it's also when we're in this state, we are connected to the wisdom of the higher self and can then begin to do the re-education that the guide recommends in the, lecture that is called the process of meditation, but is also known as the meditation for three voices. And it's very similar to, a way of working with all of this that's, very close to the inner relationship focusing work.
Darlene, I think you hit the nail on the head when you started talking about victimhood, because it occurs to me that that's could be the number one life force, you know, contender, so to speak. I remember when I was growing up, I felt like I was a victim of my family circumstances and that I didn't think I could ever find freedom or peace until I got away from them. You know? And it was obviously uh, a, a wrong thought, but it was my image, at the time. It was like, okay, I got to get out of here. I'll never find any peace on this earth until I get away from this nutty, you know, family dynamic.
Yeah. And I think that like literally, you probably brought that image in and, like chose that family to bring it up for you so that you had to contend with that because it's only through the experience of it and working with, the pain of avoiding it, the pain of merging with it, and the finally finding the higher self presencing of it that we actually evolve the soul.
Yeah. Yeah. But I hate to admit it, but I still use the same defenses with other relationships. If something is not working for me in a relationship with somebody, then I'm more apt to immediately go to the idea that I got to get away from this person or they're going to upset my peace.
Right,
You
right,
know?
right. And they will
I'm
unless
going to
you work
become
that
their
at a deeper
victim.
level. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and this is, the image is there to get your attention. That's the something inside of you that wants your higher self's attention.
Yeah.
And if you can, like awaken a little bit more instead of what usually happens is, yeah, we're familiar with that voice, there's that voice, and then there's its opposite voice or whatever. And so, like, and we just kind of tend to be on a squirrel's cage in that way or something. And,
Mhm.
kind of suffer that level of suffering. It may be a fairly low grade suffering. Sometimes the soul is ready to say, okay, we got to do something else. So it'll, give us a shove or we'll have some crisis that will shake that up. But I think we're given a lot of grace in a way, just to, again, to just kind of keep noticing that we keep doing it. And I think if we don't crucify ourselves or make ourselves bad, or, again, that's the integration part. So some part of us, judges us. Okay, so let's accept that there's a part that judges us. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it what is. And the minute that that part can kind of feel okay, we're not fighting it or we're not, agreeing with it, it has some room somehow inside of us. And it begins its own natural morphing or transformation in some way. Change is nature's constant. Change is part of the life force, right? and and I think the idea that the guide is saying is that it's like it's got a vector going in a direction of evolution rather than devolution, right? Like and so even though change may shake things up or pull rugs out from under us or topple things that we thought were good, like seems to be happening these days, I think fundamentally it's the universe knowing what it's doing, and I don't know where it's going, but that's, he also says, we only see through a keyhole, and so we don't have the big picture. And so I think, part of when we get, still stuck in our victim, it's not to judge or feel, oh, it's good to recognize it as, yes, that's, probably not helping in the situation. But then what I would do is, first of all, recognize, okay, there's some part of me that is still hurting, is still grieving, still feels like a victim,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't make that ultimate reality, but maybe that part of me needs a friend to go in and say, I see you. And I see that you're still holding this hurt. And, so like, I can hold you, like, let's be together in this, or, let's see if we can follow that hurt. A lot of times it's some residue of the pain stored in our body somewhere. And if we can go inside and find that, what might come out is just some sobs and releasing and clearing of that energy. And it was what we were feeling was the little place where it was trapped and held inside. And it was just asking for help to be able to release and move again. And when we can allow the soft pain and allow the body to digest the feelings, which oftentimes in grief is just, sobs. The body, in fear and in grief, oftentimes needs to cry. And I don't mean like little trickles, of tears. I'm talking about the body releasing, almost orgasmically, right, in the sobbing. I think it naturally clears. There's other ways, and maybe it's not everybody's way. So part of it is each one of us is trying to understand our own apparatus and our own unique way of doing it. But I think there is this way that this lecture is really inviting us to not be afraid of these feelings, and then to find ways that we can support, all of our feelings and be with all of our feelings, in a way that allows them to begin to be this regenerative pain rather than the degenerative pain.
I think with victimhood, it's if how you related to the child or the wounded part still as a friend means you're not projecting that it's the other people that are doing this to me.
Yeah, you're just saying, maybe you're saying you're agreeing with to the child, like, I see that you feel like other people are doing this to you, and I accept that that's how you feel. I don't accept that that's what's really happening, right? It's not a value judgment, but it just is. And it's not all of you, but it's a part of you that happens.
I heard a talk that, an interview that Tammy Simon just did with Janine Roth on Mother's Day. And Janine has had an amazing breakthrough. She said she had done everything in her life and still had issues with her mother, who is now 97. She's going to be 75. And she met this woman, Coco, who trained with Diederik Woolsack, who does a 6-step process, where if you're feeling terrible, it's not about the other person, it's about you. And bringing it back inside and really being an attentive witness and creating space to really listen. And she finally felt feelings that she always bypassed. And in that, she felt righteously a victim. Her mother would drag her by her hair across the floor, punch her.
Yeah, at that time she was.
and punch her. And so what happens is a child can't put herself in that adult's shoes. The adult's crazy, number one. She was totally narcissistic, totally all absorbed with herself, and then would leave her kids, go off where, and wouldn't explain where she was going, when she was coming back, or, but so it's not what anybody does to us, it's what we as a child decide what that means. I'm unlovable.
Right, which is the image, and then if it means a certain thing, then we say, then I have to be a certain way, which is the defense and the mask. And
that's true. We're love itself. And what we have to find a bridge that will help us get there. And feeling the feelings can show us the belief that is a misconception from divine reality. And then we can begin to change our mind. And she's had such a transformation in her own self. Her mother's story, it's miraculous how she relates to her now. It's truly miraculous what happened.
Yeah, great. And I believe that's what the Pathwork Guide is also calling us to, that same miracle. Exactly. And yet, like, again, to me, there's a way that we have to befriend that child, right? Because it was a victim back then. Yeah. And the part of the trauma was that there was nobody there to befriend it at that time. Yes. And so if we can go in now and hold it, then it can finally release and we
Yes.
can feel what it went through. We can understand it more fully. We can see it and acknowledge it more deeply. That integrates it as well, right?
Mhm.
So it's just a huge, huge healing process. And it sounds like I keep running into this, like everybody's finding it in all of these different
Yeah.
systems. It's coming together. It's kind of, a thousand blossoms coming out of the same basic type of understanding of the somatic and process way of doing this integration now. So, which is hallelujah, thank goodness, because all of us, I spend my whole lifetime trying to figure this out too. Finally,
Oh, me too. Me
so,
too. And
yeah.
finally got it. Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
the one I found this wonderful book, the work that Parakos and Barbara Brennan did on
Uh-huh.
the developmental stages. There's an animal communicator who just wrote Your Animal, Your Soul Mirror, Tammy Billups, and she, in the most non-clinical way, has for each, there's 5 patterns. I've had all of them. And when the pattern takes over, you're possessed.
Yeah.
And she has a whole list about how to um talk to yourself.
Oh,
It's a really good book because it takes the Parakos Brennan developmental stages and the wounds for each age, and says what needs to happen in terms of right thinking and getting aligned with divine truth. It's
I'll
a
have to
wonderful
check it
book.
out.
And the animals of people heal along with because they're drawn to people with the same pattern.
All
It's
right,
an
interesting.
amazing book. Okay, I'm taking too much time.
Well, yeah. I think let's get back to the lecture, but
Yeah,
that's really good
yeah,
stuff. And again, I think it's good to just celebrate that so much is out there, and
yes.
yeah, I'll check that out. So, as I said, this is a guide now. As the beginning of the lecture, perfection is limitless and eternal, not only in the sense of time, but also in the sense of scope. Did I skip something? Hold on, let me just see.
Nope. Oh, yeah,
Maybe one paragraph here.
yeah.
So, the advice does not only apply to taking this path as a whole, but should be applied to every step on it. You may be on the path all right and still deliberately overlook certain sick points in your soul, seeking the remedy from the outer world. This again is attachment to the symptoms. And so when we're the victim, we're looking at outside of ourselves. We think, if only they would change, everything would work, that kind of thing. So, and this again is attachment to the symptoms. So that means that at some level we have what the guide would call negative pleasure in this situation. And so it also can help to recognize, the juice that we get out of this identification. So the more you dissolve the inner obstructions, the petrifications, by facing your misconceptions, misunderstandings, and the untruth that lives in your soul, the more you allow the life force to flow through you. The more you do that, the sooner you will revive on all levels of your being. As I said at the beginning of this lecture, perfection is limitless and eternal, not only in the sense of time, but also in the sense of scope. You can sense and experience an infinitesimal part of all of this even while on earth. Whoever approaches the stony and steep road of self-finding will experience gradually, little by little, changes that are unbelievable or would be unbelievable for anyone who does not invest in this. I do not promise you miracles, my friends. Miracles in that sense do not exist. Whoever wants to believe in that kind of salvation does so because it does not entail personal effort. Wouldn't that be easy? But no, such salvation does not exist. This path is one of utter reality. There are no fairy tales. The reality I show you can be experienced by everyone, provided that he or she does not shy away from the labor and is willing to pay attention, letting Dominique in, learning to, where did I go? Hey, Dominique.
Hey guys.
We're coming, I think, closing, but we got a little section as well. So, but we're almost done with reading the lecture. But you're welcome anytime to jump on in. So happy to have you. So, it says the reality I show you can be experienced by everyone, provided that he or she does not shy away from the labor and is willing to pay the price. Yes, miracles do happen on this path, but only if earned the hard way. That is the way it should be, the way you can safely believe in because it makes sense. And do not forget another thing, that the subtle changes in the personality manifest first inside, so they are not noticeable by others or manifest in changed circumstances. The first manifestation must always be that you feel and react differently inwardly. The rest follows. So, from the victim place, it's like if they would change, then we would feel and react differently. But he's saying, like the circumstances only change when we shift internally. So, my dear friends, let the life force into your soul. You cannot do so by simply willing it, by trying to get into a holy mood. Though this may help a little, a prayer will give you the necessary strength to do your part. But the work has to be done. That of the living flow, which you are at one time or another have destroyed, has to be regenerated by your own efforts. We've blocked it off, we've constricted, contracted, and, again, our very incarnation is a statement to some degree of that fact, and then, as we, encounter the challenges of life and the defense structure configures the body around, protecting from the wounds and that sort of thing, we lose the flow. Infants are so fluid and flexible, and their life force is so expanded and flowing through their body, And so aging, in a sense, is just a gradual reduction in that flow over time. So that of the living flow, which you at one time or another have destroyed, has to be regenerated by your own efforts in facing yourself, in overcoming your resistance and sluggishness and self-pity. You should never believe, even for an instant, that what you experience is unjust and unfair, no matter how much it may appear that way. In the last analysis, in absolute truth and reality, you have caused it. You have to find the cause and find a different way to come out of it than the direction you have taken so far, the state you have remained in too long. Think about this, my dear friends. And now a little more advice for your work on image finding. What I have said in the lectures on this subject has surely shown you that various overall general subjects and concepts play a role in the human psyche. Therefore, general attitudes need to be investigated. An attitude to a general concept or idea becomes very personal in the human mind and soul, because all human beings encounter personal experiences in their lives that apply to these subjects. The method I have presented so far covers, briefly speaking, the various lists which I need not again enumerate. The life story of the individual, the practice of the daily review. With this material at hand, you can certainly be successful and have begun in your findings. But now I would like to give you an additional item to add to the method. Some of you have used it anyway without quite realizing it. But now this should be incorporated as an integral part of the work. It is this. Take all general ideas, concepts, and principles, and make a list of all those that are important in a person's life. Some I have already discussed, such as love, eros, and sex, or authority. Others I shall discuss in the future. Think of money, work, various emotions, human relationships, plus a number of other general subjects which can be examined successfully according to what is the person's most pressing problem. Find out what is the attitude of each individual toward that subject. Let people tell you first their general idea, their concept on the subject they apparently have difficulties with. Then begin to question the person about his or her life from that particular point of view, covering childhood, adolescence, young adult life, and so on. So I think, I don't know if it's making sense, but, it's a usual work with images with people, just to kind of pay attention with the problem that shows up in life, like, is it around authority? Is it around, work per se? Is it around, certain relationship things? And then, to say, well, what, do you have a generalized belief? Like, could you say all women are, or, all work is, or, like, and oftentimes in the family situation, there might be sort of, you learned even from your father, all work is drudgery, right? Because he came home every night tired and complaining about the drudgery of work. So, we internalize these things. And then if we have that, I mean, obviously your adult mind knows that, some work might not be, but somehow that goes deep into the substance of the soul. And so, any kind of work, except maybe a few exceptions, and then you approach it with this kind of dread, and, already you're worn out and don't have any inner desire or motivation to, and so that just keeps it into a vicious circle, right? And so we can find the images and their corresponding vicious circles by looking at these overall general concepts: money, work, love, authority, that kind of thing. So maybe we'll have some time and we can explore a little bit of it. Let's see if we can finish the lecture. Let that person tell you what his parents' attitude or parent attitude was on the subject. Okay, so again, going back to the parent's attitude. You may then find out that in 9 out of 10 cases, the intellectual concept is completely different than the emotional behavior or attitude. Okay, and sometimes, that's the image, but then other times, it's like the belief or the experience, like the emotional attitude is very different. So you think, money is easy, but deep down inside you see a hoarding, of, somehow, in the energy of the person or something. So something is, awry there. And so sometimes, we can get clues for the images and the wrong conclusions. And he says, incorporate this approach into the overall method and use it whenever the time seems right. Make it into a definite program. Yet there should be no rigid system. You have to work with your intuition and according to the personality. In one case, one subject should be taken first. In another case, a different one might be appropriate. And yet in another case, it may better wait with this type of investigation altogether. In due course, we will discuss many general subjects of this sort from this viewpoint of the wrong interpretation in the unconscious, and what the right reaction would and should be. And now, my dear friends, before we turn to your questions, I would like to make a proposition which should prove exceedingly interesting to all of you. There is so much friction among you, and this is unavoidable in any human group. You are also all full of goodwill and do not want any friction. The question always is how to eliminate it. There are various ways. Some have tried, some not, or have forgotten. Let me make a new suggestion, which should work out very well if you use it. You know that lawyers can defend a case from two entirely different sides. They can first represent the case from one viewpoint and be utterly convincing, and then they can take the opposite side and be equally convincing. If there is friction between you and one of your brothers or sisters, my advice is that you become an advocate in his or her defense. Take the case and try to see how the other one sees it, and present the case first to yourself. That will be the easiest. And then go on to an objective third person detached from the conflict, perhaps the person you work with, and repeat the process in her presence. This would be the second step. And if you really want to reach the highest step in the particular regard, go to the person with whom you have a conflict and be the advocate in his or her defense. Perhaps he or she will do the same. It takes courage and humility, the two attributes so inevitable to reach any success on this path. But if you cannot bring yourself to take the third and highest step, try the first and perhaps the second. So I think that's an interesting thing. As I was reading it, did people have something come to mind, or did you imagine like a situation where you might want to try applying that? Take up this task in seriousness. Do not make a half-hearted attempt. Try to forget yourself. Try to act on your adversary's behalf as though you actually were a lawyer and your reputation were at stake. By defending badly because in a corner of your being you still want to prove how right you are, you have not fulfilled your job at all. Play a game. Imagine your life depends on presenting a convincing case for the other person. The better you represent him, the better it is for you, and not as you may continue to believe, the better you defend him, the worse you come out. After the other has heard you first as your client, he will give you additional material so that you can succeed better. Listen to it so as to extend and strengthen the case for your client. Do you know what this will do for you, my dear ones? It will open new vistas of understanding. You are so used to representing only your own case. And some of this internal work, I think, is useful in that way, too, because you've got all of these different voices inside, and so you begin listening and hearing all of these other sides. But we're used to representing, our own case, and there, we know the story really well. There we do not need further improvement in practice. So learn how to see the other side. Be the lawyer for the other one instead of for yourself. This is my advice. It will be a very good exercise, the surest and fastest way to eliminate friction or to reduce it to a minimum, provided you follow it through. It may also be a good idea for group work. First state briefly your own case, and then become the lawyer for the other. Let the others judge whether you are a better lawyer in your own behalf than on behalf of the other person. And now, my friends, I am ready for your questions. So let me just pause there. Any comments or questions on that little suggestion of an exercise that the guide gives us there? I think it might be something that I'm going to explore with a little bit and try. And, I'm in several communities that, I had not remembered this lecture, and I think it might be something useful to offer in other circumstances. So I'm pleased to have refreshed my memory of that.
What lecture is this? I don't remember this either.
We are lecture 48, I believe. It's called The Life Force in the Universe. And so, my friends, I'm ready for your questions. So sometimes these questions are interesting, sometimes they're not. I don't know how many there are. Let's go a few and see how they go. Science says that life is light and consciousness. Does that correspond to what you said tonight, intelligence and light? Of course, only it is much more than that. Intelligence and light are only two details. The life force is everything that exists. Everything good and everything negative or detrimental is petrified life force. Divine truth or divine law that has not been adhered to. So, in a sense, all, I think he's saying in a way, that all more dense material, our bodies, rocks, things that are, are, in some ways, like our bodies come in, we come into bodies as representatives of some past, violation of divine truth, right? And not by intentional means, it's like we're children, we're growing, we're learning. And yet, it's through the, struggles with the physical material realm that we end up learning and evolving. And so, in some ways, this, encounter with our own limited understanding of divine law is sort of our cutting edge of growth, right? And where we meet that is here in the body, in our life experience, because it's a mirror reflection. Our body is, and our life is a reflection of what the issue is. So, what are the main qualifications and prerequisites for team workers? And after how long? Though this is, I think, a question more like about training people to do this work with others. So let's see. Question. On rereading the last lecture on the wall, it seems to me that we are supposed to find the wall. We are also supposed to realize that this wall is almost physically present. Is that correct? Answer. I do not know what you mean by physically. I mean that you should visualize it. You should feel it as a concrete something in your soul. So this is also kind of reminds me of inner focusing, right? Like we feel something, we sense something, and it might be in the body, it might be in the field, and sometimes we visualize it. So after a while, you will get to this point. But you cannot see it physically. It's just that you feel a hardness in you, something that prevents you from being completely empty and flowing. So take a minute right now and just, scan your body, tune in, like can you feel like this wall inside of you in some way, or this, hardness in you, something that prevents you from being completely empty and flowing. It is only after the wall has disappeared that one's spiritual rebirth can occur. Is a question. Does this disappearance occur when you have become conscious of everything that was behind the wall, or only after you have actually purified yourself? So spiritual rebirth can occur after you are completely conscious of everything that was behind the wall. Then the regenerating forces of nature can begin to work. But try to realize what it means to be completely conscious. It includes applying the findings at all times to one's reactions. And that is certainly not so easy. So in some ways, it requires us being present 24/7, which, we're working towards, and, every little bit of being present helps. But yeah, we're a long ways from being that present to the moment-to-moment unfolding of our life experience. Can one be completely conscious of all one's wrong trends? Is the question. Answer, the time must come. I do not say that it has to come in this lifetime for all of you. Perhaps there are very, very few for whom this is possible. But eventually it must come for everyone. Until that point is reached, you go on and on incarnating. But you can reach quite a distance in this life, and thus you speed up all succeeding lives because your psyche becomes impregnated with the process of self-search. It becomes second nature, and you will remain in the soul so that the entity will benefit by this habit in future incarnations. So that feels kind of cool to me, like that we're like impregnating our soul. We're like imprinting our soul with this habit of self-search that will serve us. I will retire. Go ahead.
That sentence right there totally made my night.
Okay,
I
good.
know. Like, thank God we don't have to start from zero again. And then it makes me wonder what we
Exactly.
started with this life with, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, and this seems to be his closing. So, and I have, if people want to stay on, I have a little AI stuff that we can play with around this lecture still, but, if people need to go, that's fine as well. So we'll have a little shift here. So he closes. He says, I will retire into my world and leave all of you with divine blessings and strength. May the new friends who have found their way here take the trouble and patience to find out whether they can find the many answers this path has to offer. Let none of you be hasty. Receive at least particles of the life force that is contained in every blessing. How much you can absorb depends entirely on your own state of mind. Bitterness, anger, self-pity, all these block the life force. Remember that. So try to open your doors. Be blessed, my dear ones. Be in peace. Be in the Lord. So,
Darlene,
uh-huh.
I have a question. Um, I didn't understand the concept of being a victim or victimhood because like in my head it comes off like, oh, as a police report, somebody, did something heinous to somebody else. So
Right.
that is like what first came to mind. But then as you were explaining it, um, victimhood is the constant, perpetual feeling that you're powerless to your outer circumstances based on somebody else doing something to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like there is like a victim, report or that kind of incident, but this is like a state of consciousness
Right.
that identifies as the victim.
I, okay. So I guess my difficulty with that is because, well, in the guide, the lecture we just read, it says you must change your inner being to change the outer circumstance. So then what happened? So then how do you justify that statement if the what is happening to you is a like systemic problem? So like for example, if you're in the third world and you literally there is no way you can get out of that circumstance unless the system changes, unless the outer circumstance changes, then how do you just can you go to a person stuck in that and be like, if you just changed your um inner consciousness, you can get out of that situation.
So I hear you, and this is the challenge, and it is the challenge for everybody hearing this. It's a little subtler than that, in the way that, like let's say somebody's imprisoned, like completely locked up or in a foreign country, and can't change the circumstances, that's not saying that they aren't a victim of the circumstance. And it may be a systemic problem, but we're never, like we still have some choice. Like we have a choice of how we will respond to that situation. And if we feel totally defeated by it, if we just feel like we want to rebel and rage against it, and attack, the problem, but usually they have more power, and so we just become more victim, So there's this, there's ways that we can choose. And I think like in the prison example, like a lot of the prisoners have gone into the sort of the prison ashram project, so like if everybody's doing time, right? And so apply, whatever your situation is, even if it is systemic, use your highest principle capacity to meet it. Use your highest spiritual capacity. Activate, something other than the part of you that feels, only the suffering, the limitation, and the abuse of it. It's not to be, in denial that there isn't a systemic problem, but if you can, there are many. The guide uses this oftentimes in that, he says, even in the worst collective crises or horrible circumstances, he said there will be individuals that will have different experiences, and those different experiences are based on their own inner approaches and states and capacities.
I know that I think of it because this was something early on I struggled with, especially just as a person of color and woman and all of that. And it took me a few years to kind of wrap my head around it. But there's this collective experience we're having that if everybody did go in and change their internal selves, it would reflect on this like larger collective. But we don't have control of everybody. We only have control of ourselves. And so the difference between experiencing something and maybe experiencing pain or experiencing pain and suffering, the suffering we create with the victimhood. And we might have experiences that are painful, but we can go into them, like Darlene said, with our knowledge that every experience we have is meant an opportunity for us to like grow from it or maybe even receive gifts from it when it doesn't look like it could possibly give a gift. And so applying that can change somebody's time in prison from, a terrible experience where they are feeling more and more powerless to going in and using that time to like get a degree and find themselves and have a rest from, maybe a situation that leaving and going to jail might actually be a moment where their life shifts in a way that couldn't have otherwise. Like we're all in these storylines and plot twists. So yeah, I don't think that explains it all, but I feel your questioning around that because I definitely spent a long time with that question of, well, that's not fair.
Thank you, Dominic. I'm starting to get it. I appreciate it. I, so if the suffering is kind of like the victimhood is creating the suffering and is not necessarily the experience itself, is how like you react to the experience.
And how
What if
you
it is
interpret it.
there's
Mhm. And
Hey,
how you
Davis.
interpret it.
Hold up a second, Mara. Let him finish.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I'm
Davis.
sorry. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
No, go ahead. May help me clear it up. So it's how I interpret it.
Okay, so Khalil Gibran said your pain about your situation is the beginning breaking of the shell of your understanding about who you really are. And think of, I can just think of Nelson Mandela as an example. Or what you said, Darlene, about we're all doing time in prison projects, or to try and take our life force, unless it's our mission in life, try and change the outer so that it's just or equitable or whatever, is looking for salvation in the wrong place. The guy did say we think we're dropped into a world that then mistreats us, but we have the mental errors, the misconceptions in our own mind, and that's our lesson plan. So we're not trying to become better egos, but to wake up to the fact that we're eternal spirit. And the limits on the outer can act like a pressure valve that causes an alchemy, so we wake up to our full potential as human beings. And instead of saying the outer, I'm being treated like shit, so therefore I must be shit. Excuse my language, but it's more the limits can make us search within for that which is eternally true and not have the outers be a mirror that's saying this is who you are. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. Go ahead, Don.
I mean, if you have, I mean, what she was saying, I don't know, it's like I like what you were talking about. Like, it's kind of this distinction that is between the pain and the suffering. Life has pain. Don't run or fight, right? When we react to the pain in some way, and a lot of times, that's, feeling the frustration because it's being caused by circumstances outside of us, or whatever. But it's the resistance to the pain, and it's what we resist is what persists, right? And so then there's this cycle again of the recreation of the suffering of and so there's this way that if we can accept the pain and like trust that it's part of our life plan, as Myra was saying, or it was like it's here for some reason for us, that there is no suffering that's senseless suffering. It's all somehow for our benefit. And it's a mystery, and sometimes it's a deep mystery that takes us a lifetime to understand. But that's a better approach, than to have the belief that, the world, we don't belong in this world, or, we would be totally a different person if, the world was going to treat us the way we should be treated. Right.
Like useful pain versus useless suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of.
Useless and useful, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
And I think there's a saying that pain is inevitable, Suffering is optional.
Optional, right, yeah. And so, but this is the fundamental duality of the world, and this is a part of, how, like, this lecture is kind of, the reason why we have all of these ego defenses is because we don't want to feel what's here. We don't want to feel the hurt. And as children, nobody could help us understand it or hold it with us or anything. And so, yeah, we just had to run or fight or stick it in a pocket somewhere, to continue to survive and go forward. But then in that journey of life, there comes a time when, we have to go back in and work with all of that material. And usually our outer life brings it back up, again, sort of as a mirror, and all of the conditions I think that we are in as well that are collective. I think we choose the timeline and the general, themes of the world that we're also in. And, because it's like we're working on many dimensions, many levels all the time. And I don't think we really understand how much beauty and, depth and goodness that we bring into the world with our personal individual work. And even just considering and questioning, that maybe, it's not just the conditions around me, but they play a role, and then, it can be a part of the study always. I like a lot, to look at the collective, and I think that we are ultimately one with that collective. And so the more we can understand the collective, the more we can understand ourselves. It's again, more that we can evolve in consciousness. So anything else? Did that help?
Did you say you have a chat GTP? Is it a
Yeah.
recording?
Yeah, I had
How long is it?
basically I don't know if it's ChatGPT, but there's an AI piece that I could share. Do you want to look at that?
How long is it?
Well, I mean, it won't take that long to go through it, I don't think. It's just a summary of the lecture, and then I ask to provide some questions, and I thought there was a couple of them in there that we could maybe look at. So it's not like a long thing.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find it. See, we're going to go back to the lecture, and then I'm going to go over one. Let's see. Okay, here it is.
Ah, it's written.
Yeah, it's
I thought it was going to be like one of those
no, well, I mean,
conversations.
there is I could go, this isn't ChatGPT. This is just, what do they call, Gemini. So I'm just working off my, Google thing. But they do a decent job, and ChatGPT sometimes gets so elaborate, I get lost in all of the details. So, so I've been using this, and it's kind of useful. So I also ask in this one, for the AI to connect the IFS and the Pathwork, in terms of, how they work together. And I thought it was a confirming answer to what I was thinking. So the summary, it says, connecting the Pathwork Guides lecture on the life force. Oh, hold on. Oh, I guess this is just the one. Hold on. I thought I had both of them on here. This is just that. Okay. Anyway, where did I find it? Wonder if I can find that again. Nope, that's not it. I'm sorry. I guess I lost, or I'm not sure how to find. But you can just, ask Gemini to summarize the lecture, and I ask it for, like a couple of, things to explore in the group. So let me see.
It's so cool that you're using it that way. I've used Claude with, I think I've talked to you about it, the Pathwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see, maybe it's still here. Hold on a second. Yeah, okay. It says, let me see. The lecture, The Life Force in the Universe, delivered by the Pathwork Guide, explores the nature of the universal life force and how human misconceptions aka images, obstruct its healing flow. The life force is described as the essence of everything that exists. In its pure state, it is flowing, eternal, and harmonious. When it is violated or obstructed by human error, it becomes petrified or stagnant, leading to unhappiness, physical sickness, and spiritual decay. Key concepts include the nature of the life force. It is not something that does or works. It simply is. It contains all the divine attributes, and death is described as an illusion resulting from a disturbance in this field. The guide distinguishes between the downward spiraling pain of illness, degeneration, and the acute but necessary pain of healing, regenerative. Healing requires opening the wound to let out the pus of inner untruths. And then the law of inner freedom. The divine law is not a set of rules imposed by an authority, but rather the state of complete inner freedom. Violation of this law is essentially a violation of truth. Practical tools for harmony. This lecture suggests a lawyer exercise to resolve the interpersonal frictions. So then, application questions. To help apply these teachings to your personal growth, consider these questions based on the lecture's methodology. Identify inner petrifications. In which areas of your life, money, relationships, work, health, do you feel most stuck or heavy? So, you could take that question in and see. See if you notice, inside of yourself, like what area, and then, see if you can sense that stuckness, that wall, it's a petrified life force, and see if you can determine what is the specific untruth or error in your thinking that might keep it from flowing. I like this thing on conceptual versus emotional reality. What is your intellectual concept of a subject like authority or love? We have our ideas about what it's supposed to be, and now look at your actual history. How does your emotional reaction to those subjects differ from your intellectual history? So is there anything in there? Am I going too fast? I was just kind of skimming through. We looked at the lawyer exercise in detail in the lecture, and he talks about distinguishing your pain when you experience emotional distress. I find it's easier for me to feel like the difference between what the guide talks about when he calls it hard pain and soft pain, because he defines hard pain as contraction against the soft pain. So the soft pain is what is. It's the pain, that is in our world, whether it's coming from outside of us or inside of us, it really doesn't matter, right? If we can not resist that pain, if we can accept that pain and grieve it, if we can see how that pain may be, strengthening us and for us in some way, whatever, if we can understand how that pain might be connected to one of our images, all of these ways can, help us stay open in the pain. Hard pain comes from, being in the pain. Oh God, now it's the pain of the pain. It's a contraction against the pain. It's the resistance to what's there. And in that resistance, everything, it's like there's the fear of the fear and the anger of the anger and the, frustration of the frustration. And it's like everything becomes compounded and more stuck, and the flow gets more stopped up. And so, like, when we go back in, and that's where I like this inner relationship focusing, is I feel like it's a way of going in and really supporting our connection, because there's like all kinds of pain tangled up. We've got soft pain and hard pain all wrapped around each other inside of these issues. And so when we can use the focusing, I think it gives us a really good support for, finding the path into the soft pain and allowing that to move, which opens our own understanding and our compassion for ourselves even more, and a deeper integration of the whole thing. So I think let me just drop down a little bit and talk about how it does connect with this lecture and many of the lectures. I see how it's connecting with the principles of interrelationship focusing. So he's saying, the AI says, connecting the Pathwork Guide lecture on the life force in the universe with the principles of interrelationship focusing developed by Ann Weiser Cornell and Barbara Gain reveals a powerful synergy. Both modalities aim to move from petrification to flow by changing how we relate to our internal experience. Here is how the two frameworks connect. From petrification to the felt sense. In the lecture, the guide describes petrified life force as areas of the soul that have become hard, stagnant, or rocky due to untruths and suppressed emotions. Focusing connection. In IRF, we identify these petrified areas as a felt sense. That's the wall that he was talking. A felt sense that often starts as something heavy, tight, or stuck in the body. By bringing presence to this tightness, and this presence is this, consciousness that's curious and open and compassionate, and what is this tightness? I'm not rejecting it. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm not trying to, like fall into it and just feel like it's hopeless and I just have to be stuck here. Submit to it. So, we want to be curious. What is this? And we are essentially acknowledging the petrified life force, which is the first step in allowing it to soften and flow again. So everything that's in us is the life force. And everything doesn't need separation. It needs acknowledgement. It needs connection. It needs, I see you. And so when we can bring the self in presence to these stuck places, and especially in the body, it's like we don't have a big story, we don't have a big thing about trauma around it. We just notice like, well, I'm just always tight in my throat or my belly, or most of the time I am, or something like that, and then we can know that there's a felt, like that's one of those petrifications of the life force inside of us. And then we can go in and begin to soften it by simply finding it, feeling it, and trying to describe it, acknowledge it. So regenerative...
Something that really helps with that is that whatever we're experiencing, if we believe it's for us rather than being done to us, we can work with it in that way. It may appear otherwise, but in the universal life force, everything is for us and everything works toward our good. So
yes,
if we have that positive belief, it can become a container to work with.
Right. And I think it's even more here in the focusing. It's actually a part. It's our higher self presence that already knows that and believes that. Mm-hmm. And so when we invoke that presence in the beginning, like by saying, I notice, I being the I self in presence, I, this compassionate, curious, open, wondering part, so I notice something in me wants my attention. And so that right there is assuming from that place that whatever that is that wants our attention is part of our journey, part of, the gift of life that is trying to guide us. It is a part of a pebble on the path leading us to something. And so, yeah, it's calling. Our pain is always calling us to its healing and is for us in that way, right? And yeah, the guide also, like, in the same way you were meaning it. But I think remembering it in this case, it feels to me like, like when I go to myself in presence, that part of me just knows that already. And maybe for other people, it's a practice and a recollection that they have to kind of anchor in or remember. But I think it is part of our higher self knowledge and wisdom that we have that understanding deeply in us already in that part. So the trick is just remembering, because we have so many other parts, and we're sort of used to the idealized self-image being the voice of our inner authority.
Yeah.
And so instead of going to the higher self and calling on it, activating it, the ISI is right there, telling us what we should be thinking and doing. So
Right, you have to be perfect. Yeah,
right.
It's never a good voice.
Yeah. And we put it on the throne of God, basically, right? Unconsciously. A lot of times we hear that and assume that it's somehow the right authority that we should be listening to, and we're bad because we don't, but we don't want to, and so we're rebelling against it, and, feeling like we shouldn't be rebelling against it, and it's just all a big tangle. So yeah, that, the true higher self, like will hold this bigger space of everything is happening for our benefit. They call it pronoia instead of paranoia or something like that, right? So
it's not judgmental, and it's totally compassionate and loving and unconditional. Yeah.
So I find mine, like, if I can just get curious, that's the key, right? Like, and maybe, it's that pulls me out. I mean, the only part of me that's judgmental is my ISI. So if I'm not in my ISI, and if I do feel the judgment, then I can bring my, I notice some part of me, the ISI, is now feeling judgmental about something, and I turn and focus on it and ask it some questions and take it deeper into self-awareness and understanding. But it's being guided by, my consciousness that is, recognizing it and not merged with it, not lost it,
Is
confused.
that specific to you, or is that all of us, that the ISI is where the judgment comes from?
I think it's everybody, yeah.
Yeah, it demands impossible perfection. And we think that if we follow it, we'll be good. And it's
I'm
been there,
just
done
saying with
that.
my parts work, different parts have different things going on, and it's helpful to know if, whenever we feel the judgment, it's the ISI.
Yeah, it's good. It's kind of like that. It's a defense. It's the part of us that, thinks we should be a certain way, and, again, it has some truth in it. So what I like to do when I hear my ISI is I like to, like, go in, because there's this inner split. There's the ISI saying what I should, and there's the real self being who it is, and then, somewhere, well, why does ISI think I should be that way, and so it has some perfectionistic demand, but it also has, a real need, like, because I'm afraid we're gonna, get hurt if we don't, or something like that, right? And so I can, acknowledge the fear of being hurt. Maybe I can, in the higher self, find an answer or find some security for it in some truthful reality that I'm aware of that maybe it doesn't understand yet or know. And so there's this, again, it's the meditation for three voices, and so the higher self is constantly working with the other voices and educating them and instructing them and helping them find the violation that is within the suffering, that is the violation of the spiritual truth that's caused the difficulty. So I think we're almost done with this. Let me just go ahead and get into finish these last two pieces and see. So it says regenerative pain versus something in me. So the lecture emphasizes the importance of regenerating, I think it should be regenerative pain, the acute discomfort of opening the wound to let out the negativity of the inner errors. Focusing connection uses specific language to handle this pain without becoming overwhelmed by it. So that's another thing that I like, because again, in this observer place, right, and using this way of languaging it. So instead of saying, I am in pain, which can lead to the degenerative downward spiral. It leads to sort of the identification with the part of us that is lost and hurting, right? And so if our higher self, if the rest of our consciousness identifies with that part, then we just kind of like become that. And I think you mentioned the possession, that's kind of like a state of possession by some part of us. And so to help from being possessed, it helps to use this phrase that kind of separates us from this merger. So it says, I am noticing something in me feels painful, instead of I am feeling pain, or I am in pain. I am feeling pain is probably better than I am in pain, because when we say I am, that's a complete, divine merger. I am that I am. Whenever we use that phrase I am, now we are saying that all of us, our divine self, is that. And so if we can, from the divine self, say, I am noticing something in me feels painful, this then creates the presence, and that's what we're trying to wake up and have, right? It creates the presence required to endure the operation. So like the pain of the operation, we have to stay with, we have to hold, we have to embrace, we have to breathe through. It's like labor pains, but it's kind of like that in the body. And it's kind of like that because we could celebrate that we're actually healing and giving birth to, a new possibility in the pain that we're feeling. So it allows you to stay with the discomfort long enough for the underlying wrong conclusions and images to be revealed and released. And, oftentimes we get conscious in the midst of these things. The actual pain in the body carries the information of the images and the memories even. So it's interesting that as we go into the body and even the body just responds, then with the flow of the energy, when we start crying, now the energy is flowing. It's no longer frozen and petrified. And with the energy flowing, all of a sudden, we're getting hits like, oh, there's the remembrance, or, oh, here's the image, or, like all of a sudden that intelligibleness is right there, with the feeling. We don't have to leave our bodies or our energies and run to our heads and try to figure it out and just keep recycling the story that we've already put together. The heads are useless in this in this process. As far as the process goes, it's useful to have some of the understanding, because the higher self then can, help us access our adult and understanding of these things. So, and then the lawyer exercise he refers to as an internal disidentification. So the guide suggests a lawyer exercise to resolve friction with others by convincingly arguing their side. So the focusing connection. In IRF, we apply this internally. Often we have an inner critic, one side of the cause, and a procrastinator or a rebel, or, inner no, an inner forcing current and an inner resistance, an inner you should and an inner no on the other side. And focusing asks us to be an advocate for both sides. Instead of taking the side of the critic, we ask the critic, what are you trying to protect? What are you doing? Why are you, and sometimes, like I said, like that protection is the tension. And so we just kind of gently say, like, I'll hold the space, so it'll be safe. Let go so we can see what's underneath. And the part that we're feeling is not the feeling that was the original feeling that we need to feel. it's the feeling of the defense. So we feel stuck, we feel tense, we feel anxious. All of that is just a feeling of the defense. Something is under all of that, and that's what we're trying to get to. And so when we ask it, we ask the rebel, what do you need? And this mirrors the guide's suggestion to find the truth in the opposing side to dissolve friction. It's also in the IFS, the way that we acknowledge, and really see all of these parts, and integrate them because they have validity within a certain context. And then they're just overextended or, distorted in certain ways. So truth as the solvent for obstructions. The guide states that divine truth is violated whenever the life force is blocked, and only by encountering the untruth can the flow return. So the focusing connection, a focusing shift is exactly what happens when an inner truth is finally acknowledged, when a person finds the right word or image for their felt sense. E.g., it's not just sad, it feels discarded, right? So you can see the difference in the richness of the information and the word discarded as a qualifier of the kind of sadness that this is, right? And so when we name this when we listen to it and it reveals this, awareness, oh, it's more than sad, it's discarded. And we acknowledge that, oh, I see, it's discard. The body experiences a physical release. You literally feel your body. Take a deep breath and shift internally. And so the release is the vibrant relief the guide describes. It is the moment the petrified life force begins to flow, again, because it has finally been met with truth. And so then he just breaks down, like a kind of, or the IAI does, a kind of equivalence of IRF and Lecture 48. But I think we covered the material pretty darn well. So let me stop the share and see if there's any final things here before we say good night.
To bring it full circle,
Mm-hmm.
initially when we started this lecture, I was feeling that negative pleasure, especially around violating spiritual law. Like, ooh, yeah, I get to violate spiritual law. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Um, because of the image that I can only get pleasure through uh being an instigator or a chaos creator or disruptor because I don't feel connected and in that kind of victim mentality, oh, it's not fair that I don't have connections and other people do and they're not um they don't have to be as like as perfect close to perfection as me and they could be less perfect than me and then they get to have it and um feeling kind of like this felt sense in my chest but there was something in my chest that well was a little bit gnawing at me and when we came back to towards the end of the lecture of seeing both sides of an argument. It jumped to giving me an example, something within me just wanted to give an example of in order for me to view this right now, to be on screen, somebody had to die to make this laptop. Somebody probably died making this laptop. And I could either interpret it as it was for nothing because somebody died for a corporation that, is trying to maximize profit, or it can interpret it as somebody um died for me to watch this, and then it brought up it's unfair that, somebody had to die for me to view this. It's unfair that people don't have access to like pathwork and this kind of work, and it just a part of me was just, it's unfair, it's unfair, it's unfair. And going into the like, kind of like this universe is for us and is like we're living in a benign universe, and whatever our task is what here where we're assigned to do. It's It was hard for me at first to comprehend that because I was still in that unfair phase of how come people who really need this kind of work cannot access this kind of work, right? But then I thought, well, if I were to bring this kind of work to the people that need it, they would probably just defend anyway and be like how I was right now is like kind of like this is bullshit. As like how you gonna tell me this is the reality of life? Like it's unfair.
Yeah.
So
Perfect. And you just gave us the lecture on the pain of injustice, or maybe that's the next one we should do. Because that's a part of what you know is real, and it's like the guide says that's the worst pain in the world is the pain of injustice. It's not fair. That's he says. I think my interpretation is what he says is the thought that caused the fall of the angels. The justice of God is not just,
Yeah.
and you know and it's obviously I mean there is a lot that's unfair in the world, but the guide is saying it's because we have this keyhole view. We don't see the whole karmic, we don't see the whole picture of the larger thing. And so from and why did we choose from a soul perspective? We might know why we chose to be the poor kid instead of the rich kid, or the you know and is that really you probably, if you understood the pain of the rich kid, you'd probably be glad that you were born a poor kid. So comparison in
Bob
the
Dylan. When you get to the top, you realize you've been at the bottom. But there's a place where you can feel the peace that is part of our divine self, that no matter what is thrown at us, we can maintain it. And that's if you're bringing it to the world and having understood the truth yourself, because people are going to, there's a place where your peace will not be disturbed. And that is going to speak louder than anything else in convincing that what's real, what's eternally true, as opposed to the temporary situations we find ourselves in.
and I think when we do hold that place, which is not an easy to come by place, but when we can, then the people that would ordinarily dismiss us pay attention.
I also think that there's the on the way there where it's like sometimes I think when we have that idea of, oh, if I was spiritually evolved enough, my peace wouldn't be disturbed, but that can lead us to contract against the disruption we do feel. And so that can lead us to more petrification of trying to strive to be there when we're not. And then we're repressing, and then we're actually making the path there longer. And so that's the one thing I would say is like, I
Yes.
allow is a thing that I say to myself often as things come up, because it used to be I contract, and now when I feel that, I tell my body I allow this to come up, I allow this to be present, and then think of myself as not solid and like the space for it to flow through me instead of getting stuck in me. That makes sense.
It does. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember, I'm 83. And when I started, I was years in not knowing what the hell's going on, feeling a total victim of the world. And then it would be months. Then it would be weeks.
Hmm.
And each time I get triggered, I come back to the truth quicker, suffer less. It's just a gradual. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's a learning curve.
That
Repeat,
are
repeat, repeat.
a long arc, but what is it? The arc to justice?
Right.
It's, yeah,
It takes a lot, you know, I mean, we're literally reprogramming ourselves, right?
exactly.
And
Exactly.
and so, you know, and it's a lot of software in there that's got to get rewritten.
Good analogy. Yeah. Out of illusion and into truth more and more and more. From not having any idea what's really true, what's illusion, to yeah, more certainty, more trust. Yeah.
And it's very
Well,
hard,
thank
you
you
know,
guys.
to see spiritual truth, you know, when, you know, in the world, you know, and in a world that denies it so much. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And without the higher self, forget it. We need that. Yeah. I see the idealized self-image. I appreciate what you offered, that it offers what it needs. I just see it as a forcing current and impossible demands and never aligned with freedom. And freedom is a divine quality that each of us, yeah, needs.
yeah. And that's why I basically identify it as, you know, like if you look at those cosmological lectures as allegories, right, you know, saying that it's about states of consciousness, the Christ consciousness and inside of us and the fallen angel inside of us, then I would say that the ISI, in a sense, represents the Luciferic consciousness and the higher self represents the Christ consciousness. And we're in between them to make our choice
So,
decision.
like the angel on the left and the devil on.
Yeah. Which one wins? The one you feed. Okay, everybody. Great
Thank you.
group. Thank you very much. We'll see
Everyone.
Good
you
night,
in a couple of
everyone.
weeks. And if you want to join us next week, you know, we'll be actually practicing the inner relationship, focusing on whatever's alive with us. So you're welcome to join us then. Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.
Okay.